And we are recording. So I want to apologize. I have not been around. This is the first time I've seen you, what, 3 weeks? Four weeks? Wow. Okay, that's not good. That's not good. And so you are stuck with me the rest of the semester. I will try to be around. You don't look happy about that, Aparna. And because I've not been around, I feel badly about it. I'm going to set up a couple of nights in the next couple of weeks for extended office hours in the evening for anyone who wants to go over anything. Because I know a couple people are struggling on some stuff before the midterm, so we'll go over some stuff again to make sure everyone is okay. I will let you know when those dates will be. As well, is there an as well? There's not an as well. Let's begin. We have 3 lectures today. It shouldn't take 3 hours. We should get through this quickly. It's some of it's review, and some of it's some new stuff, and it's not difficult. So let's begin. The first is Observational Studies. This is the review part, because I think you will have been exposed to much of this in your research methods class. I think, hopefully, maybe, let's find out. But first, on Saturday, we are having, again, the session on how to apply to graduate school. And even if you don't know if you're applying to graduate school, I encourage you to come, because it is really invaluable information. The people who have used this information in the past have actually found that they had an advantage in applying to various programs. We're going to focus on epidemiology grad programs, but we'll have a presentation from someone from the Telfer School on health systems. We can answer questions about the health sciences master's program if you want, or on grad schools in general. So it will be 1 to 4 p.m. in Photo 302, and afterwards we're going to have an informal meeting in Cafe Nostalgica. If you're afraid to ask questions in a classroom environment, you can talk to me or one of the grad students at Nostalgica. So details are here. We have a Facebook page, and previous years we have recorded the sessions. We're not going to record it this year. So if you want to come, please do. And you can bring your friends if you want. It's a free service we offer undergrads. Now, let's talk a bit about your poster presentations, which is the heart of this class. It's the biggest thing in this class. It's the thing that most people seem to take the most out of. As I've mentioned a couple times, it is December 2nd, a Saturday, but we also have Friday, December 1st available for people who have to work on Saturday or really can't make it. So there is a poll. By the way, it's not RGN, it's downtown. Forget that. That's an old slide. It's in Photo this year, right? Screw that. These are the posters from previous years. Right. Previous years, we've had professionally printed posters like this, and these individuals clearly work in a lab because they're wearing white. I'm not sure why that's all happening. Sometimes we have posters that are hand printed, then posted onto boards like this, and that's fine in previous years. That's old school. But this year, it's electronic, which means you just have to create a PowerPoint slide of the dimensions that are relevant for this, right? There's a template you can download from the website. And what's going to happen is we have rooms reserved on that day, and we're going to create a schedule for groups, one after the other, to give their spiel. And there'll be teams of judges in the audience that will review you. So we have about 10 minutes to present and 5 minutes of questions. Then you get off, and the next group comes on and presents, right? So the judges are the ones who give you the mark. And you have the rubric for judgment already available to you on the website. Now, by November 19th, I want you to go to this link and enter your team members' names, the title of your abstract, and the text of your abstract. Why is this important? This is important because if you don't get it done by that date, we cannot schedule you in to be judged by the judges. And it's difficult to get a mark if you're not scheduled. So we need to know the names of everyone who's going to get that mark, and I'll create Brightspace groups for you later on to upload your work. But the important thing is by the 19th, enter your group's names and contact information and the abstract text. Because if you do that, you get a free 5%. It's an easy 5% out of the 25 that the mark is worth rather. So that means only 20% you're being judged on, 5% is just for showing up. Right? So it's 0 if you don't make that date. So easy 5%. Get those 5%, please. The abstract that you enter, that will be published. And you can cite that in your CVs because it's technically a peer-reviewed work, a published work. We'll publish it through my publishing company. It'll be on Amazon, and you can link to it if need be, and blah, 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 blah. Okay? So please get it in by that date. And both this class and Gomez's class are entering the same process. So what's in your abstract? Your abstract contains essentially 5 things. There's a summary of what you've done. You've read abstracts before in various papers. This is kind of the same thing. And again, you're undergrad students. We don't expect Nobel Prize winning stuff, but it should contain these elements. It helps if you've got these headings as well. This is what you call a structured abstract. Some journals you've probably seen have unstructured abstract, which is like a paragraph of free-flowing text describing what they've done. For this, I recommend, again, it's not required, but I recommend a structured abstract. So the background, we'll go through each of these in turn, objective, methods, results, and conclusions. So the background is a couple of sentences on the issue. Like, hey, if you're doing something on mental health that affects a fifth of young people in Canada, blah, blah, blah. Set the stage for why you're asking the research question. Set the stage for why you're pursuing the objective. The objective is, what is it you are doing? Everyone has pretty much the same methodology. You're going to review the literature to assess the evidence regarding blah, whatever your research question is. And your methods, again, everyone's going to have the same methods more or less, right? You're going to have, you're doing what's called not a systematic literature review. I recommend using the term structured literature review. That's not an official term. It's a term that I made up for this course. The judges are aware that it's a new term. And the reason I say structured, not systematic, is it's great if you're doing a systematic review, but you get some really anal judges who say, well, that's not really a systematic review because it hasn't got this, that, whatever. And it's not like a regular literature review that you get in undergrad English class. It's something in between. And the judges will be instructed to make that determination, right? They'll know what a structured review is at that point. And in your methods, you can mention things like the databases you searched, the keywords you searched, your inclusion-exclusion criteria, and so forth. And the results, March, that should be November. I know what that's in March for. So you're going to have some results by then. Whatever you have by November 19th, you put that in your abstract. For example, blah, relevant studies are found, showed association, therefore, Okay? We're not going to mark the abstract, just have something there to be published. Your conclusion. Conclusion is answering your research question. So have that ready to go. And you can say the literature does not show evidence of, or it does show evidence of, but definitely answer the question. And it's nice if you've got some kind of recommendation for future work as well, like more work needs to be done on elucidating the population that this affects, etc. Show some creativity. Okay, what's the poster all about? Your poster is an attempt to summarize research in a systematic, scientific manner. Not simply your opinions on things, but showing, well, the evidence suggests that this is the nature of whatever. It's somewhere in between a paper and a presentation, but it's rigorous. People, hopefully you are asking me if your topics are appropriate or not. Some people have asked me, some haven't. What I recommend is avoid describing things such as, what's the nature of mental health in Canada, but rather look for associations. Like, is there an association between and Is there association between marijuana use and bipolar disorder in a certain population? Okay, those are the best or the easiest kinds of posters to defend because you can search literature in a more resultant manner. You're more likely to get things that are interesting. And the secret of this, is to be narrow, to be as focused as possible. Really specify your population. Maybe you're looking just at Aboriginal women living in Nunavut or something like that. Or English-speaking Jewish people in downtown Montreal between the years of 1960 and 1980. The more focused you are, the less likely people can criticize any generalizations that you make because you're limiting it to a certain population. People have asked me, how many papers should you find in your search? This is science. In science, we find what we find. But this is also class, wink, wink. And you've only got a few weeks to finish this, and it's not a Nobel Prize-winning endeavor. So I recommend that you game the system a bit and tweak your objectives and your search parameters to find somewhere between 6 and 20 papers that are relevant, just to make your life easy. If you end up finding nothing, that's a finding. That's a fine finding. If you find 100 papers, that's a great finding. It's more work for you to go through. But if you've got your search parameters such that you find 10 or 12, that's a fine number to extract information from and to summarize appropriately and to make your life easy. Make your life easy. Okay? Done. Some resources you can look on how to make a poster. These are more about how to make physical posters, but the content is still there. Use the visual medium. I don't recommend animation. I don't think the judges will respond well to that, so keep it static. Text is fine, but visuals are great too. Excitement and creativity are important. So in the past years, some people have really gone really creative with their imagery and figures and so forth. That's great, but you will not sink or swim based on your creativity. You sink or swim based on the rigor of the science, on your inclusion-exclusion criteria, on whether or not you answered the research question, if your results are meaningful, if the conclusions you made from your observations are meaningful, if you've identified biases in the studies that you found, if there's a methodology that you've developed to assess the quality of evidence. So remember, systematic review includes a research question, a search process, and a method for assessing the quality of the studies that you found. That could be a checklist, like, hey, are these the best quality papers? Have you checked for selection bias and all kinds of biases? Yes or no? And again, it doesn't have to be great. What we're looking for to see, did you do these things? That's the end of the story. In previous years, the judges have been quite excited by exciting topics and by your excitement. They're human beings, so they can be swayed a little bit too. But the commitment I make to you is the judges in general are quite generous. But if you end up with a mark under 70, I will remark it myself. And whatever mark was highest, you will get at that point, either my mark or the judge's mark, just to make sure that you're not being unfairly penalized by unfair judges. Okay, so in general, in the past, maybe of all the times I've taught this class, maybe 3 or 4 groups have gotten under 70. Usually it's an A. Yeah, because you've worked this hard, chances are you'll be rewarded for it. So spend time crafting a good research question. Use the PICO method. The judges will be instructed to look for a clear research question and whether or not it follows some kind of structure. Key parts, as I mentioned, the background. This is not just the abstract now, this is the actual poster. Give some reason for why you are asking the question and the baseline knowledge that people need to understand the question. I don't need to know everything that went back to the dawn of time. If you're doing something on bipolar disorder and marijuana, why are you asking that question? Studies show that there's a suspected relationship between this. About X numbers of people in Ontario every year are diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The rate of marijuana use is increasing. Fine. Therefore, we ask the question, is there a relationship between marijuana use and bipolar disorder? So it's like writing a paper, but in point form. The research question, again, phrase it well and make sure these flow logically from the background. The method, as I mentioned, everyone's kind of the same thing. The structured literature review, do not call it a systematic review unless you are sure it is truly a systematic review. Chances are it is not. And be as methodological as possible, right? So mention your keywords. What database did you search? Did you limit your studies to RCTs or other kinds? Were raters employed? Okay, so you've done the kappa. You know what kappa is now. You don't have to use kappa, but you can try it out. Say all the members of our team rated the papers independently, and only the ones we agreed upon went in. It's going to be 100% agreement. But if you can say that there's some kind of process by which you systematically assess your agreement, that's one level above what most other people will do, and include your inclusion-exclusion criteria, etc. The results are interesting. So these are the results of what you find, not the results of the studies that you assessed. So what are your results? The results of the literature search. We found X numbers of papers. Give me a flowchart. Say we started by this number. We applied our inclusion criteria and we got this number. Of that number, we're only able to actually access this number of papers. Show the process by which information was funneled down. Okay. Showing it in a graphical form or a tabular form or a flowchart, that's a great idea. The more visual, the better. Okay, so also in your results, you're going to extract information. What I recommend is having a table. Each row represents one of the papers that you ended up using, and each column represents an element from that table. For example, the citation, the population that you accessed, the data that you extracted from that paper, and any comments about that paper, such as it's a low sample size or whatever it might be, right? And the data can be something like an odds ratio. We'll talk about odds ratio stuff. It can be descriptive. It can be narrative. Like, these people felt as if there was association between their medical marijuana use and bipolarism. It's okay. Whatever the data you extract, keep that in your table. So at one site, I should be able to see, oh, that's what they found from their little search here. So, discussion. What does it all mean? Discussions are really hard to write. And if they weren't, we'd have computers doing all this work. But the discussion is the intellectual contribution that you make. And at this stage of your careers, you are intellectual individuals. You have 4 years of health sciences education behind you. You are prepared to be contributing scientists, yeah, at a low level, but still a contributing scientist. Your intellects mean something. So if you need a formula for a discussion, there is a formula that I recommend brand new writers use, and it's very simple. It's a 4-step formula. First step is repeat the main finding. Like, hey, you know what? There's no association between medical marijuana and bipolar use. Second, state the limitations of your methodology. We only looked at English-speaking things, papers, therefore we were able to get whatever. Or this is a new field and clearly there aren't enough papers in this field. Third, this is the hardest part, is contextualize what you find with what is known in the literature. This is the truly intellectual component of science communication. Use words like, it was surprising that, it is not surprising that, it was unexpected that. That shows there is a groundwork of research you have done, some reading you have done, and you had some expectations. And either your work conforms those expectations or it does not. So contextualize what you have done with the grander literature. Show that you are contributing to the greater sea of intellectual thought. And lastly, suggest future work or show how this is relevant to policy. Based upon my findings, I think we need to spend money on a really good randomized control trial to assess this. Right? It's okay to find nothing. In this class, that's fine. That's rigorous. Okay? And this discussion is going to be the hardest part of your work, probably, because it's not simply a robotic method of following a recipe. There's actually intellectual injection that needs to happen here. Okay, lastly, conclude. Answer your question. Make sure you answer your research question. A lot of people forget to do that. You got to have references. So every year people ask, oh, I got no space left for references. Okay, if you got no space left for your references, you can maybe hand them out on a separate sheet of paper to the judges. They may kind of look funny at that. You may lose a couple marks for that, but at least they'll be in the judge's hands. But the references can be really tiny. They can be like a really small fine print at the bottom, and that's okay. It's over here. Okay, yes?
Do you want us to reference on like the bottom of each page, or do you want us to have a list at the end?
Well, it's only one page. Your poster is one page. So a list at the end. Yeah, it's one slide. Okay, I'm going to be clear about that. So instead of creating a poster, you are projecting a poster. Yeah, Maureen?
Last semester we had a big problem with one of our projects. She told us to put everything on one slide, and then there was absolutely not enough room.
Oh, but this is part of the challenge. So a science poster of the type you would make for a regular conference is like this. This is what we do every single month in real science. So you have to condense your work into one slide. Now, the way you make posters professionally is we create a PowerPoint slide and set the background to 4 feet by 3 feet, because that's the standard poster size, right? So just do that, except you don't print it. Simple as that. We don't print it, we just project it. So that is much bigger than 3 feet by 4 feet. So you got a lot more room to play with. One giant slide that fits on that. So work for, let's say 4 feet by 5 feet. It's plenty of space. Plenty of space. Right? Just don't be verbal. Don't be verbose, rather. Okay? So I'll say it again. It's not a PowerPoint presentation. It's a single slide with a poster that you would have ordinarily printed and taken to a conference. But instead, we're saving you $100, not printing it. We're just going to project it instead. Right. So there it is. Okay. Other things to remember with your poster. Oh, yes?
Is it better to have like very tiny references on the poster, or did you have them less on paper?
It's probably better to have them tiny on the poster, because some judges will say, well, whatever, the facts will sell it. Yes?
So for the abstract, what do we do for the references?
You don't need references for abstracts. Okay, so do not reference the abstracts. Cool. So, like I said, color and images, great. Be visually dynamic. There is actually a rubric entry for visual dynamism, but the priority is the science. You can do this in point form. It's a way to save space. I don't need to see all the words. Point form is actually better. When you're doing your oral, because there will be a presentation focus, do not look at your thing and read out. You'll lose points there for sure. So to practice with your friends, stand in front and talk to the judges, be dynamic. This is an exercise in simulating real science communication. So know your topic well. And this is about methodology. So be honest about the frailties of your methodology. The judges will be instructed to respect your knowledge of your limitation. That's part of the scientific process. Don't lie. So I've judged a lot of these things in the past, and it's so obvious when the students lie. It's like sometimes there are two judges at separate times, and we both ask the same questions. So the first judge goes in and says, well, did you try this methodology? He says, no. And the second judge, you try it? And yeah, we did, because the first judge primed them for that. And don't do that. We talk to each other. So it's okay to have limitations. You won't lose points for limitations. This is an exercise in understanding the rigor and communicating the rigor. It's fun. Everyone enjoys it every year. So more photos from previous years. There's Dr. Yaya, I believe, like, analyzing stuff. More people. Look at that. This old school posters. Not even PowerPoint printouts. They're cut and paste. See, that's what a PowerPoint printout looks like. So this is made on PowerPoint, then taken to a print shop, and they print it out. And it costs like $100. So we're saving you $100 here. That one's kind of busy. I don't recommend having that much text. You don't need that much stuff on there, but it's pretty good. Another old school one. Oh, look at that. So every year I break out the robot belt buckle. This year, there's a story there, but this year, because it's not in one central location, it's going to be challenging. We're going to have a bunch of classrooms and photo. We're trying to figure out still, there's going to be one room where you all meet. There'll be coffee and refreshments there as you wait for your turn to go to the room to do your presentation. So you're going to be dressed more or less well, right? And take this seriously as if it was a scientific presentation, as it is, because it goes in your CV. We made this in such a way to make it citable on your CV. Yes, madam? The rooms are open, so people can come. Yeah, people can come. Much like if this was an open scenario, as it was in the past, people can watch you. However, because there are multiple presentations going simultaneously, chances are people are busy, preparing their own. Right? So if you're in a room with someone else presenting, just shut the fuck up, let the silence reign, okay, and go practice elsewhere. Okay. You can post those from previous years, which may not be relevant because this is the first year we're doing this electronically. Yes?
While we're not presenting, because it's on PowerPoint, not to have people walking around talking.
That's right. Yes. Okay, so when it's your turn to present, you present and you go away. Now, you may be, we haven't decided yet if we're doing your presentation once and having a bunch of judges interrogate you for that one presentation, or having you present twice throughout the day. That's something we got to work out logistically, which is why we need your stuff in by the 19th to figure out logistics. Okay, so when you enter your stuff on November 19th, it'll ask you, are you absolutely sure that that somebody in your group cannot present on the 19th, on Saturday? If you cannot absolutely do it on Saturday, we will move you to Friday night. We prefer to have most people on Saturday, but we will move a bunch of people to Friday night to get it over with, because so be honest with your scheduling issues. Okay, so start now. If you haven't started already, most people have. There's some people who don't have group partners. If you're one of those people, email me. I'll email the class to see who's available. Refine your research questions. Very important. Focus on a question. And this is not a test. It's a conversation. So again, the judges are instructed to judge you on your conversation, on the scientific communication that takes place here. I have some strategies that I can share with you on how to get through tough moments in your presentations. Like, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. How would you do that? Occasionally you get an asshole judge, well, I'm not here to tell you, you got to figure that shit out yourself, right? But in real life, we will say, I never thought about that. Like, how would you do it? Be honest. It's okay. Judges want to know what you did and why you did it. So when they point out flaws, explain, oh, you know what? We did this because we didn't have enough money to pay for papers that require payment. We couldn't speak Hungarian, so we left out that paper. Or, I didn't know how to do this analysis, so it was a little blank here, for whatever it might be. Be honest. Have a reason for things. That's the systematic nature of a systematic review, even though this is not a systematic review. All right. There's a video here. I won't play it for you now. We recorded a video from 2013 for Research Day of what things are happening. Again, it's different because we're doing electronically now, but you get a sense of the deal. Any more questions? Yes. Yeah, you can fake it, but don't lie. You can say like, we have this so far we've got this number of papers, and they suggest this, and it may change in the future, right? So
If it does change, can we update it? Can we publish it?
we'll try. We'll try. In the past, we've tried, and sometimes you'll see it, sometimes we failed, because the formatting begins almost right away, right? And so the students are like, oh, I gotta change this shit now. I've already formatted. But we'll see. More questions? Yes.
How much time does each group have?
10 minutes oral, 5 minutes Q&A. So 15 total. Yes.
Will they cut you off?
They should. Yeah. Yeah. There's probably some leeway, but in general, especially if you're like, the first ones up, or even the later ones up when they're sick of your shit, like, oh, enough of this, move on. Yes?
If there's other people in the room, are they allowed to ask a question?
No, not during the actual, well, that's a good question, Right now I'll say no, but we'll have to talk about that amongst ourselves and figure that out. Good question. In real life, they would. So when I say in real life, in real conferences, when you present posters, people ask questions all the time. In real conferences, there are often judges as well, because usually a prize for best poster. And while the judges are interrogating you in real life, other people will ask questions. And it's a dick move, but people do it. So you know who's going to ask questions, right? You're looking around, I know. Right? Any other questions? You have more opportunity to interrogate me on this in the future. Okay, moving on. Remember this one lovely graph. This is, again, how I see the flow of study designs in the quantitative world. The qualitative world we don't talk about. However, you are free to do qualitative analyses in your poster presentations. Be clear on that. But in the quantitative world, there are descriptive studies and analytical studies. Descriptive studies we talked about a bit. It's like who, what, where, and when. Who's got, X% of people in this room have dumbass disease, right? That's a description. The analytical world is divided into observations and experiments. Experiments, remember, are when we intervene and change a variable. So a randomized controlled trial is an experiment. We're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about this, observational analyses. So analyses involve relationships between two variables. An observational analysis is when I observe the universe unfold naturally. I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to watch what happens naturally. And there's a series of designs. We're going to focus on the three main ones, which you have seen before in other courses, but we're going to go over them again to make sure you understand. In the hierarchy of laziness, I like to think that the cross-sectional study is the easiest to do. The cohort and the case control are the next easiest. Probably the case control is slightly easier than the cohort. And lastly, the experiment is the hardest and the most expensive, which is why drug companies tend to do them, because they've got power and money and prestige and all that fun stuff. Right. First one, the cross-sectional study. This is called cross-section because it's like a salami of time. The salami of time, the name for a really good band, or a really bad band. I play guitar for the salami of time. Nothing really? All right, fine. So the salami of time runs lengthwise on the time axis, and we slice the salami of time. And the cross-section of the salami of time, that's what we look at. So that's a cross-sectional study. So it's great for measuring prevalence. Right now, in this section of the salami of time, how many of you have sniffles? Okay, well, maybe X percentage of you do. So that would be a cross-sectional study. Right now, what is the situation? And it's really good for measuring prevalence, as I mentioned. So right now, people who currently live in farms are more likely to have going to kill you soon flu right now than are people who don't live in farms. And we do that simply by, we look at the people, compute the people who live in farms, compute the people who have going to kill you flu, and then compute an association between the two. I cannot say which came first, the flu or living on a farm, because the cross-sectional design has no time component. It's right now in time. I don't know what came first. Therefore, I cannot assess causation using a cross-sectional design. I can only say there is an association. Therefore, possibly a relationship. Okay, the exposure here is the farm, yes or no. The outcome is the flu, yes or no. Okay, another example. I like using this example a lot, is the association between antiretroviral drug usage and being nauseous. So HIV patients who take antiretroviral drugs often report being nauseous. So we're looking at this association. So out of 1,000 AIDS patients taking ARVs, 55% are nauseous. That's a cross-sectional design. I don't know if they were AIDS patients first before taking the ARVs, or they take the ARVs first and then got AIDS, which is no reason for, why would you take ARVs if you haven't already got AIDS? But still, you get the point. Okay? Or areas with more smokers are also areas with more lung cancer. Maybe they had lung cancer first and moved to where their smoking friends live. Or maybe they had smoking, we don't know. But these are cross-sectional designs. So the major disadvantage is, what the hell is this? Is that you cannot measure cause and effect. And very commonly, surveys are cross-sectional. You get a phone call, say, excuse me, do you have lung cancer and do you smoke? Right? Okay. Next is the case control design. The difference between the case control and the cohort, and again, I'm repeating myself because I know you've all seen this before, but it's important to get it straight in your head. The differences between the two are gated by when the exposure and the outcome are ascertained. In a case control design, the outcome is ascertained first. And then we look backwards in time to see what the exposure status was. In other words, we look for the disease first, and then we see if the exposure happened. So we select our subjects based on their disease status. You find some people who have the disease, these are the cases. You find some people who don't have a disease, those are controls. And we look backwards in time to see what they were exposed to. How do we look backwards in time? Medical records, exactly right. How else? Is that hammering? That's right, but there's another way we can do so. For example, Aparna, did you brush your teeth today? You didn't brush your teeth today? Wow! I expected a yes there. That's nasty. Okay, so what did I just do to Aparna other than shame her publicly? I asked her, right. So another way of looking backwards in time is to ask. So interview stuff, and that of course leads to recall bias. And with medical records, we have information bias. Didn't brush your teeth. Wow. Okay, so there's some biases involved there, but also the challenge is selecting the controls appropriately. So remember back in the bias lecture, we talked about that case where people had erroneously drawn an association between coffee drinking and pancreatic cancer. Remember that one? It was a case control study, and they had chosen the controls poorly, and that created this spurious relationship between coffee and pancreatic cancer. So selecting the controls is an art unto itself. So again, the ARV example is taking ARV drugs associated with nausea. Our design in this case would be you find some nauseous people, you find some non-nauseous people, and ask them, did you take these particular drugs? Obviously, that's an insane design for this question. If I find some nauseous people right now on campus, the chances of them having taken these drugs are minuscule, if not vanishingly small. Chances are they took beer was their drug of choice that caused them to be nauseous, right? So the nature of the question dictates which design we would use. But if I would tell you, here is the question I'm asking, how would you do a case control design in this case? It would look like this. We ascertain the outcome first and look for the exposure second. Another example is smoking associated with lung cancer. In this example, we find some lung cancer people, some non-lung cancer people, and look backwards in time to see if they smoked. And that's actually a fine way of answering that question. So, example, is getting a tetanus vaccination associated with developing autism amongst 4-year-olds? How would I design that in a case control milieu? What's the outcome? The outcome is autism. So I'd find some autistic kids and some non-autistic kids and ask about whether or not they were vaccinated. So case controls are great for when the outcome is rare. Why? Why is it great when the outcome is rare? I can do this all day. Feels kind of good, actually. No? Yes.
Well, you can easily just go find it.
Exactly. If the outcome's rare, I can go pick and choose them. Right? I don't have to wait for them to manifest naturally. I go to the clinic of rare diseases and choose them right away. And then find some of their non-ill siblings and they're my control group. It cannot measure incidence, and this is critical for what we're going to do next, in the next lecture. So with case control studies, yes, madam?
Why couldn't you just go and choose them if the disease wasn't rare?
Well, okay, if I'm choosing them, that's a case control study. So I'm saying you can still do it if it's not rare, but it's really useful if it's rare.
Oh, okay.
right? So as you'll see when we do the cohort example, if a disease is rare, the cohort is really difficult to implement. Okay, so when a disease is rare, your case control is your best bet for a viable design. Now, we cannot measure incidence rates with the case control because with an incidence rate, I'm looking to see how many cases manifest naturally. If I am picking and choosing my cases, they did not manifest naturally. So I'm always going to get an artificial incidence rate in the case control study. Right? You guys see that? I'll say it again just in case. In the case control design, I am artificially choosing my cases. I'm going out and looking for people with the disease. They are not manifesting naturally in my sample. Therefore, that is not a true incidence rate. That's more of a me-selection rate. Okay. So here's how it looks if visuals are useful to you. Have a population. You have some people with the disease. People with the disease are always called cases. You have some people without the disease. They're always called controls. And we look backwards to see what proportion of each of them were exposed. Remember, and a lot of lay people miss this, amongst people with the disease, there is always going to be some people who were not exposed. Amongst people without the disease, there are always going to be some people who were exposed. For example, you find some lung cancer patients, most of them will have smoked, but there's always going to be some who didn't. You find some people who don't have lung cancer, most of them will not have smoked, but there's always going to be some who did. So the nature of population epidemiology isn't the purity of if you smoke, you're going to get lung cancer. It's more like if you smoke, you're more likely to get lung cancer. If you've got lung cancer, you're more likely to have smoked. Right? That's an important nuance because we're comparing probabilities and rates. We're not comparing absolutes. So the next big one is the biggest one. That's the cohort study. This is the one that's most easily understood, but the hardest one to do because it's more expensive. So as the case control is defined by ascertaining the outcome first, the cohort study is defined by ascertaining the exposure first. So we start with a population, all the students in Ottawa, and I just say I'm doing lung cancer and smoking. I find some people who smoke, I find some people who don't smoke, and I wait. And I see who gets lung cancer. I may have to wait 50 years, but I'm going to wait. So amongst my smoking group, a certain percentage will get lung cancer. Amongst my non-smoking group, a certain percentage will get lung cancer. And I didn't compare those percentages. Remember, amongst my smokers, some of them will not get lung cancer. Amongst my non-smokers, some of them will get lung cancer. So again, we're comparing ratios, percentages, probabilities. Is that a real incidence rate, by the way? If I'm watching the population and seeing how many cases manifest, is that an incidence? Yes, it is. So I can compute an incidence rate with a cohort study. In fact, that's the only way I can do it, by watching a population and seeing disease manifest naturally over time. So studies are selected based on whether or not they have the exposure. If you do the smoking, if you don't do the smoking, if you've taken the drugs, if you haven't taken the drugs, etc., etc. All right, this is how it looks. You've got my defined population, like students in Ottawa U. I don't randomize them, right? If I randomize them, I'm doing an experiment. I'm choosing which group they're in. I'm not. I'm watching. I'm observing. That's why it's an observational study. I'm observing, see who smokes, who doesn't smoke, and then over time, who gets the disease and who doesn't get the disease. And I compare these two ratios afterwards. Right, example, do these drugs cause nausea? In a cohort milieu, I would design that by looking at some people who take the drugs and some people who don't take the drugs and wait to see how many become nauseous. Okay, in this class, which study method is best for performing well in the final? Studying the slides or studying the textbook? Well, I find those who are studying the slides, those who are studying the textbooks, and then I compare their actual marks at the end of the day. Simple stuff. So this is great for situations in which the exposure is rare, for the exact same reasons that the case control was great when the disease is rare. So what kind of exposures are rare? Doing something really unusual, like what's really unusual? Like breaking the sound barrier is somewhat unusual. So maybe several thousand people in the world have broken the sound barrier over the past century or so. Okay, so I could do a random sample of 500 people in Ottawa. I'll probably find one person who's broken the sound barrier. Or I can do a cohort, and I can find those 500 people who live in the city, and then I choose some controls who don't, and then I wait and see if they manifest the outcome I care about. And we can determine incidence from a cohort. Case control, we cannot. All right. So these two words I want you to know, prospective and retrospective. Prospective means going forward in time. Retrospective means going backwards in time. And this can be a little confusing because sometimes people use the term prospective study to mean a cohort study. It's not perfectly correct, right? And sometimes they use the word retrospective study to mean a case control study. Don't worry about those people. You use the words I tell you to use. Cohort is this ascertainment of the exposure status first. Case control is ascertaining the outcome status first. Now, there is such a thing as a retrospective cohort study. Right, what do you think that looks like? Remember, prospective means going forward in time, retrospective means backwards in time. Cohort studies always move forwards in time, but I just told you there's a retrospective cohort. What the fuck is that? What's a retrospective cohort? Yeah, go for it.
When you go back in time, but you still go forward in time. So say you started off in 2007 and you looked in 2009.
Yes, you go forward in time, but in the past. Okay, I'll show how that looks in a second. So this is how a retrospective cohort looks. It's you are doing this. Well, it's not bad. It's not a good thing. Yeah, but okay. It looks like this. Let's say I'm doing a prospective or a cohort study of vaccination and brain tumors later in life. I don't know, make some shit up, okay? So, but I'm doing this through medical records. Even though this is a cohort study, I'm looking at people who are vaccinated versus people who aren't vaccinated and see if they develop these tumors later in life. I will do it through medical records that took place in the past. So I'll go back to 1984 records of kids' vaccinations, and then I'll go to the records in 1995, those same kids, to see if they got the disease. So in other words, all the stuff took place in the past, but the movement of the analysis was forward in time. That's a retrospective cohort. It's a stupid word, stupid term, confusing as hell, but it shouldn't be because it's straightforward. Okay. Cohort studies are also called concurrent studies, and this is terms that are pointless. Longitudinal studies all mean the same thing. They mean cohort moving forward in time. These designs help. I'm not sure if these visuals help you or not, so I'll zip through them. So the retrospective study is also called an historical cohort or a non-concurrent perspective study. The terminology gets confused all the time. And the reason the terminology is confused is that there are several professions that are almost the same profession. Epidemiology, social medicine, medical anthropology, various kinds of sociology. They all kind of do the same thing at times and develop independently their own terminology. And so we struggle to have those terminologies speak to each other. So for the purpose of this class, just stick to the basics. Stick to cohort, case control, and prospective and retrospective. And know that a retrospective cohort is just looking backwards in time for something that's moving forwards in time. Wait, great. I've totally confused you. I'll stop now. All right. So both of these designs have some biases implicit in them. So in a cohort study, which again is the easiest to understand, because you start with your exposure, you're smoking, and you see if you get the cancer. It's easy to understand, right? But there are biases here. So there's biases in ascertaining the outcome. Are people we think who have cancer, do they really have cancer? Have they been diagnosed as such? Right? Is there some bias in the information? Information bias here in terms of, is the diagnosis of the exposure consistent with diagnosis of the outcome? There's biases from non-response and losses to follow-up. Very often, in a large enough cohort, we will lose track of some people. And those people have important data. If these are the people who are most likely got the disease and died of the disease, we don't know about it, well, that artificially now lowers our association because we're not getting those people who got the disease. And analytical biases. So maybe when we look at the actual analysis time, we actually quantified an association. So we have the psychological impulse to find something. And we've got some advantages, disadvantages. So advantages, we can compute this thing called a risk ratio that we're going to do in a second, easily with a cohort study. We can't do with a case control. We can measure incidence. We can easily assess the temporality, so we can see that exposure comes before outcome. I saw you start smoking. I waited 5 years, and then you got lung cancer. I know you didn't have lung cancer when you started smoking, so I know in this case smoking comes before cancer. You remember your Bradford Hill criteria? Temporality is one of them. We can look at multiple exposures. So I start watching you for 5 years. I can look at your smoking status, your drinking status, your marijuana status, all the stuff, and I can wait to see what manifests later on. We can minimize some biases because we're at baseline status. So right now I can make sure I'm measuring certain kinds of things with the best tools available. And this is the strongest design in the observational domain that we know for assessing causality. Experiments are the best, but if you can't do an experiment, this is the best thing to do. Disadvantages. It takes a long time. So sometimes 5, 20 years to do a proper cohort study. We often require very large sample size. It's really expensive to do this well. And again, if the disease is rare, I may never detect any of them, unless I've got a sample size in the tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands sometimes. Right? And again, loss to follow-up is real, and sometimes that diminishes our validity. And let's say I'm doing this over 25 years. And when I started this project in 1990, whatever it might be, 1992, I'm doing measuring smoking and does it lead to pancreatic cancer. So in 1992, we had a certain diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. It was a tool with a swab of some kind, maybe a stool sample. Okay, 15 years later, we have a different diagnostic tool. It's better. It's based on computer technology, it's ultrasound, whatever it might be. So as the diagnostic precision has gotten better over time, that is biasing finding a result for those who were enrolled later in time, and other kinds of biases too. So as the technology evolves, changes over time make this a less valid design. Okay, here are some questions here. Which is the appropriate design for this scenario? Does moonwalking cause diabetes? So this is how you do this. Is diabetes the outcome or the exposure? It's the outcome. Is moonwalking the outcome or the exposure? It's the exposure. And by the way, moonwalking, I don't mean the Michael Jackson variety. I mean physically walking on the moon. Is that rare or is that common? Well, it's rare. 12 men have done it. 3 of them are dead, right? That's rare. So the appropriate model for that is going to be cohort, because we can select those 12 men and select 12 controls and wait to see if they develop diabetes. For this one, eating rice, does it call hermaphroditism? Hermaphroditism is getting the genitalia of both sexes. Okay, is that common or rare? Trust me, it's rare. Okay, and because that outcome is rare, eating rice is not rare. The appropriate design is going to be case control. Why? Because I can find those handful of hermaphrodites in the world, and I can match them with some controls and look backwards in time to see if they ate rice. It's a stupid question, but that's how you'd answer that. In which study can you measure incidence of disease? Cohort. Always get faster rate. Cohort is the only one who can measure incidence. Okay, more examples. Is there an association between climbing Mount Everest and getting diabetes? The same as moonwalking one. Climbing Mount Everest is still rare. Thousands of people do it, but it's still a rare thing. Maybe you know someone, but that person is probably unique in your life. So a rare exposure, cohort. Association between left-handedness and getting mad cow disease. Is mad cow disease rare or common? It's rare. So a rare outcome means case control. An association between left-handedness and gender. Okay, so this is an interesting one. Your handedness is likely not going to change throughout your life. Your gender is likely not going to change throughout your life. Obviously both can, but they're likely not to. So because both of these are not subject to temporality, you can use a cross-sectional for this. Because the association you measure today is going to be the same association measured tomorrow and 15 years from now and 20 years from now. And this one, what factors were likely responsible for the Salmonella outbreak at the Christmas party? So this is a classic question. This is an outbreak investigation question. Think about the way the public health epidemiologists investigate outbreaks. So, and this is very common. People get sick at a party. or at a picnic or something, right? And you're sent in to investigate. What data do you have available? You have the disease status available. That's all you have. The disease already happened. If you've already got the disease status, well, you're stuck with the case control. Because then you just marry it to some people who don't have the disease and you ask them, did you have the chicken salad? So, outbreak investigations, always case control. What's that? You got a cohort sample, you wait to see who gets an exposure, then you wait to see amongst each group who got the disease, then for that disease you get a test group, and then you run an experiment and you get, what is this? This is a real thing, and I don't know what to call it, and I don't want you to worry about this. I show you this because I want you to know I've shown you 3 design types. That is not an exhaustive list. There are scores of design types. I've just shown you the 3 basic ones from which we build other designs. So don't worry about this slide. Just recognize that life can get more complicated, but we are not going to get more complicated in this class. So let's talk a bit about confounding to review, because confounding is probably the most important source of error in observational epidemiology. So remember, a confounding variable is something that intervenes in both the exposure and the outcome and either masks a true relationship or creates the illusion of a relationship. So the example I'll give you, as I gave you earlier in this course, is you're doing a study of breathing issues in a high school, and you find that you're comparing students in shop class versus students in English class, and you're seeing who gets breathing problems. And you find that indeed, students in shop class have a lot more breathing problems than students in English class. And you conclude, erroneously, there's something in the shop environment that causes them to have breathing problems. What's the confounder here? It's in the slide. You see it already because it's in front of you. Confounder is, Aparna, shout out at me. Can you, having brushed your teeth today? No? It's smoking, exactly, okay? So people in shop class are more likely to be smokers. People who are smokers are more likely to have breathing problems. So the confounder has to have an influence on both the exposure and the outcome. Right? So when we do these observational design, we do our best to minimize the possibility of confounding. And of course, the way we control for confounding is to stratify by the levels of the confounder. We analyze the smokers separate from the non-smokers. Right? Cool. Now, we talked about confounding already, but there's something else, another kind of modifying variable. This is a variable that alters the direction or the nature of the relationship between exposure and outcome. So the relationship is real. A confounder can sometimes create a fake relationship. This is a real relationship. But this additional variable changes the direction of that relationship. This is called an effect modifier. Sometimes it's called interaction term, but effect modifier is more common. Interactor, interaction term. So it does not mask or create a relationship. It modifies the direction of the relationship. So here's an example. This is, on this axis here is intense exercise. And this axis here is joint mobility. So the more you exercise more intensely, the more mobile your joints become. Straightforward stuff, right? Except if we do it for old people, the more intense your exercise, the less mobile your joints become. So in this case, age has altered the direction of the relationship between joint mobility and exercise. There is a relationship, absolutely, but now that relationship changes depending on if you're older or you're younger. So we say that age is an effect modifier. So another thing we test for when we do population epidemiology is the presence of effect modifiers. Here's one from my PhD thesis 1,000 years ago. Right? So we looked at whether or not freezing embryos leads to pregnancy. Okay, so here we have the number of eggs that divided during IVF versus the probability of pregnancy. So the more eggs that divide, the more likely you're going to be pregnant if the embryo is frozen. If it wasn't frozen, then the more eggs that divide means a lesser probability of pregnancy. That's a classic effect modifier. That's beautiful. I wept with joy when I saw that graph. I'm getting my PhD, right? So look at that. That's beautiful. Okay, here's an example from literature. Age-specific modifier, papillary, whatever it might be. That's the last slide there. Next slide deck. You guys don't want to break, do you? Keep on going? Want to plow through? Want to break? Break? Yeah, break? Finish it? All right, I'll finish it. I'll talk slowly so she can come back from her bathroom break. Okay. I'm surprised no one shouted, "Finish him! Finish it! Finish it!" Tough crowd, man. All right, so this is my first time using these slides. I did a thing with a German company. That sounds really bad. I did a thing with a German company to produce these epidemiology videos, and they spent a lot of time with their animators to produce these slides for the videos, and I stole these slides, and they're not really working out that well, so maybe this is the last time I'll use them, but we'll see how it works. So we're going to look at measurements of association using the German slides rather than my own. So last time we looked at cohort design. So remember, cohort design is ascertaining the exposure first and getting the outcome. Case control, ascertaining the outcome first, looking back to see the exposure. Which one can measure incidence? Thank you, cohort. Prospective versus retrospective, forward in time, backward in time. We looked at some complex designs, like that magical, ugly thing I showed you. That's called a nested case control. Don't worry about that. Don't even think about that, except unless you really want to. It's just ugly. Just recognize they exist. Okay, now remember the Bradford Hill criteria that we did online, that I wish I was here to tell you about in person. One of the Bradford Hill criteria was the strength of association. What does the strength of association mean? Well, that's a measurement of association. That's what we're going to do right now. Look at ways of measuring that strength of association. And this is, again, a review from stats class and research methods, I hope. If you haven't seen this before, good. You're going to see it now. But there are three main measures I'm going to introduce to you, and with an additional modification. So the relative risk or risk ratio, odds ratio, and the attributable risk, which has two versions, the AR and the PAR. Get them straight. Okay. In addition, there's going to be some modifications of the relative risk called the relative risk reduction and the absolute risk reduction. You'll see all this. Good times. We begin with our contingency table. Practice making a contingency table. A contingency table only works with dichotomous categorical variables like smoking. Do you smoke? Do you not smoke? Lung cancer. Got cancer? Not have cancer. Okay. It's really important that you've got it set up this way, with the exposure as the rows and the outcomes as the columns, and the yeses are the first ones. It's really important because the math won't work otherwise. We need different formulas otherwise. The textbook, I believe, really messes with you at one point by showing you a contingency table with one of these reversed. So look for it. Always look, make sure that's there. We tend to label the table this way, A, B, C, and D, and the total is N. So this is where we put the data from a study, either a cross-sectional study, a case control study, a cohort study, or even a randomized controlled trial. Let's get that straight. We call these rows the marginals. Remember that from computing kappa? We'll see the marginals again when we do chi-square, but this is the data that goes in here. Okay, so these three things we're going to measure right now. The absolute risk, the relative risk, and the attributable risk. So the absolute risk is when you're exposed to something, what's the likelihood you will get something bad from that thing, right? So we can do absolute risk if you're exposed to something and if you're not exposed to something, because, believe it or not, even if you're not doing anything bad, you have risk in your life. So if you smoke, you have a risk of getting cancer. If you don't smoke, you've got a risk of getting cancer. A smaller risk, but it's still a risk. Both of those are absolute risks. If I divide those two, I get a relative risk. And that tells me how much more risk I have if I smoke than if I don't smoke. The attributable risk is how much of the risk of getting the thing, the cancer in this case, can I reliably say was caused by the smoking. That's what we're going to try to measure right now. Okay, so absolute risk is a proportion of people with a yes outcome. Yes, I got the disease. I got the cancer. I got the whatever. Right, so this is the terminology we're going to use. Absolute risk in the exposed group, E, and absolute risk in the not exposed group. So this is the first row of my table, and this is the second row of my table. And that's simply the proportion who got the disease divided by everybody who had that risk set. Right? So again, the absolute risk in my exposed group is everybody who got the disease divided by everybody who was exposed. And the absolute risk in the unexposed group was everybody who got the disease, who didn't do the bad thing, divided by everyone who didn't do the bad thing. So all my non-smokers who got cancer divided by all my non-smokers in general. So A divided by 1 is the absolute risk in that row, and C divided by 1 is the absolute risk in that row. Pretty straightforward. Okay, here's a summary again. Now, this is a cohort study, so we can say that that proportion is the incidence rate in the exposed group. So amongst my smokers, the incidence rate is the absolute risk in the exposed group, given by that. Amongst the non-smokers, those who didn't smoke, those who weren't exposed, we say I sub O or I sub NE. I'll use both. That's non-exposure. That's C over CD. Okay, what can I do with that information? Back here again. I can subtract them. What does that give me? Well, in this group, this is the probability that I'm going to get the bad thing, the cancer, if I smoke. And this is probably I'm going to get the cancer if I didn't smoke. If I subtract them, I'm getting the additional probability. How much additional probability smoking gives me of getting cancer. That's that difference tells me. So we call that the absolute risk reduction, because if I were not smoking, if I stopped smoking, how much risk would be reduced from that really positive action of not smoking? Simply subtracting those two incidence rates. Basic math, straightforward stuff, right? So now let's move on to the relative risk. The relative risk is when I divide these two. So the first one is, again, the incidence rate in that group of smokers. Second one, incidence rate in the group of non-smokers. Divide them. That's my relative risk. Fantastic. So, do an example. Cohort study. We follow 100 smokers and 100 non-smokers for 10 years. Why not? Okay, and we see who ends up getting lung cancer. These are what our data look like. Okay, this is not real data. This is made up. So again, amongst our smokers, 75 out of 100 got cancer, 25 did not. Amongst our non-smokers, 10 got cancer, 90 did not. Total number of no's in my sample of 200 was 115, whereas 85 got cancer in my total sample. Okay, so my relative risk is going to be the incidence rate of my first row divided by that second row, and I get that. Do the math, 7.5. Is that big? Yes, that's huge. So in public health, 2, relative risk of 2 is pretty big. We set the alarm bells if a 1.4 comes up. Okay? The magic number for any ratio is always going to be 1. If I'm dividing two things and I get 1, that means those two things are the same. Any ratio of 1 tells me two things are the same. So I'm looking for something that's not 1. What's not 1? Well, I'm going to do some statistics to see if statistically it's not equal to 1. But 7.5 is definitely not 1. So this tells me that if I'm smoking, I have a risk 7.5 times greater than if I were not smoking. Okay? The absolute risk reduction, I subtract those two numbers, and I get 0.65. I will interpret that in a second. But first, let's look at this other thing called the relative risk reduction. And that is this absolute risk reduction divided by the probability of getting the bad thing if I didn't smoke. All right, there's a lot of math going on here. Okay, what does this mean? So this is, again, my baseline risk. So if I do everything right, what is my probability of getting the bad thing? And this is how much I would reduce my risk of getting the bad thing if I didn't do the bad thing in the first place. So if I divide those two, I'm getting how much at a population level I can make the population better if I ask them to stop doing the bad thing. There's a lot of word salad going on there. Work it through. See if you can understand what that means. If you can't, just memorize the formula. Yeah. I don't know if I can. Okay, so the incidence rate in the unexposed group. That's our baseline risk. Everyone's got that. Let's say you do everything right in life, there's always going to be some risk of getting the bad thing just from being alive in this horrible world, this horrible, tragic world that we're stuck in, which is why we have marijuana, damn it. I didn't say that. And then this absolute risk reduction is how much risk is reduced if you stop doing the bad thing, which is, in this case, smoking. If I stop smoking, then the population has a likelihood of having this less likelihood of getting the cancer. So if I were to divide that then I'm getting the proportion is the percentage of baseline risk that I can reduce if I stop doing bad things. All right, does that kind of make sense? Maybe? Fuck, I'll work on it. I'll work on it. Okay. This, my friends, is what implosion looks like. All right, let's go back to our example. These are our data again. Right, the relative risk reduction, we compute it, and we get 6.5. How do I interpret that? Okay, this is our interpretation. If that population avoided doing the bad thing, in this case it was smoking, then you reduce the risk of lung cancer by 650%. That's extraordinary. That's a lot. Okay, now let's talk about attributable risk. With attributable, I'll tell you a story about attributable risk first. So my first job interview when I got my PhD, I was, I'm a PhD, I'm a fancy epidemiologist, and it was with the Atomic Energy Commission, because my first degree was in physics. Atomic energy, epidemiology, I got this. How many epidemiologists know physics? None. Me, I got this. So I walk in, great interview. Well, except for a couple bad things, right? One bad thing I'll tell you about later because it's relevant to a future lecture. The second bad thing, I said, compute attributable risk given these data. I said, what? So they gave me some data. And I'm not very good with computing things on the spur of the moment. I got to look up formulas. This is why I give you cheat sheets, because it's not rational. But so like, yeah, right. And after like really messing about for a bit, I thought this, and they said, that is the right number, but we think you got it by luck. And they were right. So I didn't get that job. So I hate attributable risk. This has a really bad memory for me in my life. So I understand if it doesn't have one for you either. But since then, I've mastered it. So with attributable risk, what we're looking for is some determination of how many of the cases of the bad thing that we see, in this case, lung cancer, are truly attributable to the bad behavior. Because remember, there's always going to be some baseline risk and some people who get the disease who did everything right. So it's important to say, well, from a public health policy perspective, is it really worthwhile spending a lot of money and effort stopping people from doing a thing if it's not clear how much of their bad disease outcome is truly attributable to that behavior? So that's how we measure excess risks. How much excess risk does a behavior give us? And there are two ways of doing so. There's the PAR and the AR. We're going to compute both of them. So we're looking at the fraction of cases that would not occur in a population if this behavior were eliminated. That's the PAR, the population attributable risk. Okay? In other words, how many lives would be saved if people did not smoke? This is what the PAR gives us. Now the AR, which is not the PAR, is the attributable risk in the exposed group. That's what that means. And this is, if we take the rate or the probability of having something in the group that does the disease and subtract it from the group that did. Okay, let's back up for a second. If you take the incidence rate in the exposed group and subtract it from the unexposed group and express that as a percentage of people who didn't do it, that's what the AR tells us. I know that doesn't help. The math will help. So this will be a fraction of the population that would have been saved if they didn't smoke. So the AR is given by this formula. Remember that? That's the same as the ARR, that numerator, but now we are dividing that into the risk in that first group. And that gives us that. That gives us this. That's the same, once you do the math, as the relative risk minus 1 divided by the relative risk. That means if you know the relative risk, you can work backwards and compute the attributable risk. If you know the attributable risk, you can work forward and compute the relative risk simply by going back and forth in these formulas. Now you know why I had like a breakdown when they asked me this question in the interview, right? So that's the AR formula. The PAR formula is that. So this is the total incidence rate. The total incidence rate is, regardless of your exposure status, how many people in your sample, the smokers and the non-smokers, how many got the disease. And this is the incidence rate in the unexposed group, those who didn't smoke. So divide through, and we get that formula. Okay, so let's compute the numbers. The attributable risk from our smoking example is 86.7%. What does that mean? That means that 86.7% of the lung cancer cases were probably due to smoking. And that's just computing the excess. I mean, we don't really know what their behavior was. We don't know what kinds of people these were. We don't know their genetic predisposition. All we know is this percentage got the disease, this percentage does not give the disease. If I subtracted out the risk, I get this amount of excess risk that I can control for. With the PAR, if I work out the math, I get 0.765. And that tells me that 76.5% of lung cancer cases would be prevented if nobody smoked. See, so there's a slight difference in those two things. It's how many cases in my sample would have been prevented if they didn't smoke, and this is how many cases in the population would be prevented if it didn't smoke. So one is about the sample, and one is about the population. So the PAR tells us about generalizations about the population, and the AR tells me about specifics about my sample. Okay, interesting. Right, so remember the relative risk is a ratio of incidence rates. So, do you remember which observational design allows us to compute incidence rates? The cohort, not the case control. So what do you do if you have a case control? Well, you have to estimate it. If you cannot measure an incidence rate in a case control, you have to estimate the relative risk using the odds ratio. So the odds ratio can be used to estimate the relative risk when the disease is rare. What does rare mean? People disagree. But 10% is not a bad guesstimate. So you can measure rarity in the population as a whole or in your sample. If the prevalence of disease is 10% or less in your sample, chances are the odds ratio will resemble the relative risk. So the odds of exposure amongst the diseased, people who have lung cancer, is A over C, and those among the undiseased is B over D. You divide that through, and you get AD over BC. So that's the formula that you should remember for odds ratio. It's just the cross divisors. AC divided by BC. AD divided by BC. Okay, example. Here's a case control study of 6 Creutzfeldt-Jakob patients. You know what Creutzfeldt-Jakob is? We talked about this, right? So it's mad cow disease in humans. Very rare, right? And we have 10 subjects without CJD. So because it's rare, the case control design is the most appropriate. We go to the CJD clinic, we get 6 patients, done. We get 10 people without it, done. And then we look backwards in time to see if they'd eaten beef in the past month. And the data looks like this. So amongst those who ate beef, 3 of them had Creutzfeldt-Jakob and 4 didn't. 3 did not have Creutzfeldt-Jakob. 3 did not have Creutzfeldt-Jakob, and 6 did not have Creutzfeldt-Jakob as well. So that's our data. So the odds ratio we compute, and we get 1.5. So in other words, the odds of Creutzfeldt-Jakob are 50% higher in the group that ate beef. Okay? 1.5. That's fairly high. Much like the relative risk, the cutoff is about 2 or 1.5, something like that, okay, before we start sounding the public health alarm. So both the odds ratios and the relative risk are ratios. Therefore, how symmetrical they are around 1, unity equals 1, matters. So the greater than 1, then we say there's an association between the exposure and the outcome. If there's less than 1, then the relationship is protective. So if your OR or RR is greater than 1, then we say the exposure is associated with the outcome. If it's less than 1, then it's protective against the outcome. Some examples. Smoking is associated with lung cancer, 7.5. Smoking is protective against Parkinson's disease. Did I ever tell you about that? People don't talk about that a lot, but it's true. Smoking actually can prevent some things. I won't say it loudly because public health doesn't like me when I say that. So some exposures, even though they're bad in some ways, can prevent. So alcohol is associated with bad behavior. Alcohol is protective against virginity. It's true. Let's move on. Okay, so here's some data. I didn't record that, did I? I might have. So look at these data. So this is some kind of disease. I don't know what it is. Let's say it's cancer. And this is smoking. So first thing you see in this table is hopefully you see that it is transposed. This is not the right way to write a contingency table. Usually the exposure's over here, the outcome's over here. So right away, you're at a disadvantage. So look for that right away. So in this case here, the relative risk and the odds ratios are both very close, 0.93, 0.91, right? So because it's less than 1, we say that smoking is not associated with the disease. In fact, it's probably a little bit protective of the disease. Fine. What if we break down these same data by gender, looking at men and women differently? So in males, these are the data. So the relative risk is 1.8, odds ratio is 2. Both kind of similar, but now for smoking, if you smoke, you're more likely to get the disease. Here, if you smoke, you're less likely to get disease. For men, you're more likely. For women, the relative risk and odds ratio are very similar, less similar rather, and it's still greater than 1. Isn't that bizarre? So let's go over what we just saw here. If I combine men and women together, I get a relative risk and odds ratio that are similar but protective against the disease. If I separate the men and women, I get very strong odds ratios showing smoking causes the disease. And for the men, the RR and OR are similar, and for the women, they are not similar. What's going on here? These are real data, by the way. What's going on? What's the next slide, so you can read ahead. What's going on is sex is a confounder. Remember? So if I don't tease out sex, which sounds like another drinking joke, I know it's not, but if I don't separate out by gender, if I combine the two, then sex is masking this relationship between the outcome and smoking, right? So if I tease it out, suddenly I see the real relationship. And there's a much higher prevalence of disease among females. As a result, in the female group, the disease is not rare. So the OR and the RR are not as similar. But among men, the disease is rare. So the OR and RR converge together. So most of the non-smokers are also female. So these observations of my population now allow me to better understand the relationship between my exposure and my outcome. So it's not sufficient to simply dump the numbers in, pull the crank, and get my measurements of association. I have to explore a bit demographically and factor-wise to see what's actually going on. Okay, your homework for that is this. And I think I've already uploaded the answer. So it's one homework question for that. Very interesting. Last bit of thing for today. So we forge ahead? Yeah? It's a short one. All right. You also look very unhappy with me. It's the attributable risk part, I know. Sorry about that. All right. We're going to talk about attack rates today. Attack rates are something very specific to outbreak investigation. Did I ever tell you about my professor when I was a grad student who investigated the outbreak in our office Christmas party? Did I ever tell that story? I can't remember the stories I tell you. So when I was a grad student, actually before I was a grad student. So when I was a grad student, I met a professor in my department who used to be a grad student in that same department. And when he was a grad student, they had an office Christmas party, after which people started getting sick. I mean, really violently sick in very inopportune times. Like planes had to be landed as professors were throwing up in planes and shit, and ambulances were called. And so he decided to take it upon himself to investigate the office Christmas party as this new epidemiologist, and he computed attack rates to do so. So what he ended up concluding was there's a very high likelihood that his own chicken salad made everybody sick. And he was able to confirm this because as he's writing this up, his mother-in-law started puking in the kitchen after she had tasted his chicken salad. So he wrote a paper on this investigation that he did about the office Christmas party, and it got published. Then he got a phone call from the government complaining that he had detected probably a Salmonella outbreak and had not notified the Notifiable Disease Registry. So he's in violation of public health law. So don't do that. I don't know what to tell you. So today we're going to start a very small taste of outbreak investigation, which is what a lot of public health epidemiologists do. And if this intrigues you, this is a career path. So what these people do is they're sent out on a daily basis to instances where public health emergencies have taken place. Sometimes they're contaminated water, or some strange disease pops up, or often it's some kids have diarrhea in the daycare. Right, we got to figure out what caused it. Is it C. diff or is it tuna salad? What is it? Okay, so attack rate. Attack rate is just a special kind of cumulative incidence rate. You're all masters now of incidence rate, but with attack rate we compute it specially for outbreaks. And outbreaks or epidemics are just small duration disease concerns. With a cumulative incidence rate, remember the denominator was the average size of a population? Remember that? So if we said that we're looking at incidence for the entire city of Ottawa, the population changes throughout the year. Like beginning of the year, it's a one number, end of the year. So we try to use the average as best we can. Sometimes we use the number at the middle of the year as our denominator. With the attack rate, the denominator is always the size of the population at the start of the epidemic. And that really is the only distinguishing feature of the attack rate. With other kinds of incidence rates, we care about how long various individuals in the population were at risk. Remember the incidence density? We actually looked at length of time for a denominator. With cumulative incidence, we cared about average size. We don't care about that with attack rate. We just care about the size of the population when the outbreak begins. As the outbreak progresses, that size is going to change. We don't care. We care about only at the beginning. So, I just said this. Okay. So here's an example. City of Ray-Wattville, had 10,000 people in January 2009. At the end of the year, 6,000 people had contracted dumbass disease anew, meaning incidence, right? So by the end of the year, 2,000 people died of all causes, 3,000 had moved away. So the cumulative incidence is going to be the number of new cases divided by the average base population. We did this in the first part of the class, right? So we're going to compute the average base population and divide that into these new cases, and that gives us our standard incidence rate. For the attack rate, same numerator, 6,000, but all we care about is the population at the start, which is 10,000 people. So we do the math. Average base population is 10,000 plus 5,000 divided by 2. So 7,500 is the average base population. So 6,000 people divided by the average base population gives me this cumulative incidence rate. The attack rate is going to be 6,000 divided by the population at the start, or 600. So right now you see there's a difference between the two. Okay, this is used solely in outbreak investigation and usually for foodborne stuff. So, nausea, diarrhea, all the great stuff, right? So as with other incidence rates, we only care about people who are at risk for the disease. So the attack rate for measles would not include people who've already had the disease, so they're not at risk. So at risk matters. Example. Before we do an example, there's something called a secondary attack rate. So the primary attack rate is the incidence of people who get the disease, and the secondary attack rate is the incidence of people who get the disease from the people who just got the disease. So, in other words, the contacts. If you get something tonight in this class from me, and you go home and give it to your family, then you are the primary attack rate, and your families are the secondary attack rate. Here's an example. We have 7 cases of hepatitis A amongst 70 kids at a daycare. Each child comes from a different family. So the total number of people affected, the families is 32. So we have 7 kids plus 25 contacts. Okay, the primary attack rate is going to be 7 cases divided by 70 kids, 10%. The secondary attack rate is going to be 32 people in their families, out of which 5 got the disease. Oh, sorry, 5 out of 25. Sorry, yeah, 25 people rather, because 7 already have the disease. So 25 contacts, 5 cases. So that's primary and secondary attack rate. So right away you see something special here going on. Primary attack rate concerning, secondary is much higher. So it's concentrating amongst the contacts, which is the sign of an epidemic in the course of spreading. So here's a summary of the kinds of measurements that we've learned so far in this class. Basic incidence rates look at new cases divided by people at risk, and we look at the average population denominator. The attack rate, same numerator, but different denominator. Secondary attack rate, we only care about the contacts. And point prevalence is number of cases at a given point in time. Fine. Let's look at an example, and you'll see how easy and pointless this is. So let's say we're looking at the HSS graduation gala, which you're all going to in, April? Or whatever, I don't know. Right? And let's say they serve you egg salad and tuna salad, and there's 125 people attending. The next day, 220 got diarrhea. Let's break it down. These are the data. Okay? So amongst all the students who attended, 75 ate both the tuna and the egg salad. 100 ate the egg salad but not the tuna. 200 ate the tuna but not the egg salad. And 50 ate nothing. These are the vegans. Okay? So of those who got sick amongst the vegans, 15 still got diarrhea because that's what vegans do. I like vegans. Vegans are cool. I'm picking fights with vegans here. Okay, amongst those who ate amongst the 75 who ate the tuna and the egg salad, 60 got sick, and so forth, right? So if we ask these questions, what is the attack rate in people who ate the tuna but not the egg salad? Well, these people ate the tuna but not the egg salad, and this number of them got sick. So 70 over 200, 35%. So 35% of those got sick. The attack rate in people who ate the egg salad only. So ate the egg salad, but not the tuna. That's 100. 75 of those got sick. That's a pretty large number, 75%. And if you ate both of those things, well, out of 75 who ate both, 60 got sick, so 80%. So based upon these data, what was the probable cause of the diarrhea? The egg salad. Why? Because those who ate the egg salad alone had a much higher chance of getting diarrhea, and if you add some tuna to that, only marginally increased a bit. It's the egg salad that's driving this incidence rate. So that's a quick and dirty way, literally quick and literally dirty way of probably identifying the cause of this diarrhea outbreak. Okay, so if you want to do an outbreak investigation, these are the steps. I won't read them out entirely for you, but this is just what the CDC recommends for outbreak investigators. And if you want to pursue that career, I recommend it. It's rewarding. So hopefully I will see most of you tomorrow about applying to grad school. If not, see you next week.